I'm very self-conscious right now because I want to say something perfect and poetic and beautiful, and I just know that this picture.
Hey, I'm walking here. I'm walking here.
He didn't make the movie to crusade about anything at all. He made the movie because he saw something in the culture that was great to take pictures of. Nobody had seen those images and those midnight cowboys on 42nd Street.
Talking at me. I don't hear a word they're saying.
It was the very first movie that I ever saw that was a picture of New York that really looked like New York. It didn't look like Easter Parade and Judy Garland was going to come down singing. It looked as scuzzy and dirty as any other part of New York.
He was fascinated by America, by New York, by the drama of urban America.
No matter what Joe Buck's particular delusions might be, the cowboy-themed hustler is a very, very gay thing.
The winner is Midnight Cowboy.
I'm not even sure why it got an X.
If I'm going to America to make a movie, this is the movie I'd like to make.
It manages to express the zeitgeist. It expressed its time by being of its time, because nobody ever really knows their own time. So when people express their own time, it's generally by accident.
Well, good to see you, Nancy.
Hi, Adam.
Hi, how you been?
I'm good. How are you?
Keeping busy? I'm well. That was fun. I had a great time seeing the documentary at the Orpheum Theater in Saugerties, New York.
Wasn't that a lovely place to watch it in?
Yeah.
It was a great screening and a great audience. It was one of my favorite screenings.
Oh, good. Yeah, the conversation was really good afterwards. The Q&A, and you know, I'm one of these people who kind of, even though I've moderated my share of Q&As over the years, there's something I'm curious to know your thoughts. Like, you know, after you see something, you kind of need time for it to gestate, right, and to kind of form opinions and to let it sit with you. Especially all the themes, for instance, Desperate Souls, Dark Cities, and the making of, make sure I got that title exactly right. The Legend
Not
of,
the making of, it's the Legend of.
The Legend of the Midnight Cowboy. But it brings up a lot of important themes, you know?
Right.
And yet we immediately go into a Q&A like 30 seconds later. Have you ever thought about that as a filmmaker?
Well, first of all, I think it's one reason that Pamela Yates was such a great moderator, because she knew that. She wanted us to have time to process the experience, particularly the end of the film. Of a lot of people find very moving, I'm happy to say, and she wanted people to sit with that for a bit. And I think she was very smart not to sail into the predictable questions about why did you make this film and how did you find out about it? And not that there's anything wrong with those questions, but it's not what people are thinking at that moment.
Right.
And I think she did a marvelous job in helping us move away from the things that are sometimes a little bit, tired, the same questions, the same answers, and asking us questions we hadn't been asked before.
Yeah. I like it when I see the filmmakers having to think, maybe, kind of working it out as they talk about it. Well, I remember the birth of this documentary, and I talked to you, I think, over the last bunch of your films, but I remember the last time you mentioned it, I think, even like in person when you were finishing talking about the last documentary. And I think already had read Glenn Frankel's book, and because he did the podcast at the time of publishing the book, which this is inspired by, right? You want to be
That's
careful. You'd like to see
well,
it.
because I'm not using his book as a script. And some, when you adapt a book, you really stay very close to the overall structure of the book typically, and a lot of the themes in the book. And it's true that some of the themes did inspire me to go further into go down those rabbit holes. So it really is an inspiration. And I know Glenn feels good about that as well. He and I have become very good friends in the process
That's nice.
of making
He's a
this.
sweetheart. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think he would no sooner say that this was a tight adaptation of his book than, I would. So they're two wonderful different works of, I don't know whether you want to call them art, but they're different works and ways of representing Midnight Cowboy.
Absolutely true. And I think adaptations, one could have like an endless, conversation around that subject, because the mistake that's too often made is trying to recreate the original in a different media form, and it just doesn't always work like that. It rarely does, in fact, probably, whether it's a play or a or a film from a play, or nowadays films from plays. I don't know. Did Glenn Frankel, who again wrote the book on which your documentary was inspired, did he happen to see it in your company? Did he happen to see it at a screening where you were present?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Okay.
yes. Oh, definitely. He saw it before I finished it. I wanted him to see a rough cut. I wanted to make sure that I hadn't misinterpreted something, or there was information that maybe I had forgotten to put in that would be important. He was very helpful.
Wow.
And I spoke with him all along the way. So, whenever he also helped me connect with some of the people, because he had interviewed some of the folks obviously before I did. So he made those introductions. He couldn't have been more helpful.
Speaking of which, when I'm recalling now that we're talking about my questions that I was going to ask, but I try not to, because I'm like, a mole or something, like in the audience. There were so many people had questions. I try to resist the urge, because, I want to give everybody else the chance. And so, but I did have one thing, which was not like a very sophisticated question at all. You had John Voight, who was had a very powerful presence, one of a number of people, in The Ghost of John Frankenheimer, certainly.
John Schlesinger.
John Schlesinger. I'll have to now thank you for correcting me. I even took a quick just because I get nervous and then I stumble and I always make some mistake. John Schlesinger. John Schlesinger. That's right. And another great John Frankenheimer, fantastic as well, but John Schlesinger in this case. And his ghost is very present, of course, here. His lover, his partner was great. But John Voight, with all the controversy around him, was such an incredible presence in the film. It must have been just so wonderful for you to have that experience. What happened to Dustin Hoffman? Can you talk about it?
No, there's not really much to say. He wasn't available. I think he was finishing up a film or something like that, and he just simply wasn't available.
I see. Okay. How was that for you, though, not getting somebody so central to the film? Is that hard for you as a filmmaker when that happens?
Yeah, on the first day that you discover it's not going to work, then it's pretty awful. And then you begin to think around it and realize, very fortunately, that Glenn Frankel had interviewed him on tape when he was doing his book. So he provided that interview material for me. He never knew it would be used in a film, and you can hear a coffee cup, clattering and stuff like that. So
yes,
because he didn't think it was going to be used for anything, but it was the most recent interview of Hoffman. So we did use quite a bit of that. We used a couple of other interviews as well. So you know what? In filmmaking, there is always a way to solve the problem. It's very rare that you can't work around an obstacle like that. And that's part of our job, is to problem solve. So that's what we set out to do. I would love to have had Dustin, don't get me wrong, but you work with what you have sometimes, and sometimes it works out just fine.
Yeah, and I don't want to dwell too much on that. I was just that was like a curious question. Then I said, don't ask it. There's a positive vibe going on in this room here. Let's keep it positive,
Thank you.
And because I didn't know, maybe he said no. I just. But it'd be interesting to find out once he sees it, because no doubt he'll want to see this documentary. he'll want to see it. And I wonder what John Voight thought too. Seeing,
Yeah, yeah.
do you ever get the
I haven't
feedback?
heard from him. I have not heard. I sent him a link. I have not heard yet.
Okay.
Fairly recently, actually.
All right. Well, we happen to have John Voight popping out. No, I wish I could do that too, but and he'll probably gasp. He's such an emotional person. And it's such, yeah.
I think he's gonna like the film.
When you read the book, again, I don't want to harp too much on it, but I do want to know what it was about this, maybe even just to say the story of Midnight Cowboy. What was it that spoke to you? You did talk about this during the Q&A, but of course, people out there listening or watching now will not have been there, likely. So I'm just curious to know what kinds of themes maybe took your, attention.
He was doing something in his book that I've done on a number of my films, where I look at a story or even an issue, and I look to put it in on a larger canvas and understand its context, understand. When people say, is this the making of Midnight Cowboy? I say, no, it's the moment of Midnight Cowboy. And I think that Glenn was going for some of that as well. He also delved much more deeply into the story of James Leo Hurley, which I didn't have time to do. I would have loved to have spent a little more time on that. But I didn't have that luxury of time, because I spent more time on John Schlesinger. I'm not saying that Glenn didn't, but because I wanted to show the film. One of the things that takes up time in a movie that doesn't take up time in a book is that you're showing things.
Yeah.
So his book is, I don't remember the number of pages, but it's very thorough. And I couldn't be as thorough because I wanted to show a lot. And I also wanted to weave things together in a way that he didn't. His chapters are more succinct. One chapter deals with Schlesinger and one chapter deals Hurley and I was very interested in weaving these things together so that you feel there's a kind of magic to it all. There's a kind of, as Lucy Samp says, there's an alchemy in making movies. And I was trying to kind of express that this is free association. This is a conversation that we're having with our viewers. And it's not structured so tightly. It's not an outline. You don't have crib notes that you can look at and say, oh, well, she's dealing with this here and she's dealing with that there. No, it all kind of comes together. I hope that's what our hope was.
And because it's a Nancy Buirski documentary, certain themes are going to come up that may not come up in other people's version of the making of a film, or fleshing out the legend of the film. For instance, the poverty, urban blight, a mental illness, all these things that the film almost takes for granted. The actual film, when you're watching it, you're looking at performances from stunningly talented actors, and it's hard to think about much else when you're they're in the scenes together. Brenda Vaccaro, who by the way is in the film. And my God, how could I almost forget Jennifer Salt? There's another theme, right? The blacklist, and so many wonderful things. I don't know that there's other documentaries filmmakers would have brought up these themes, or certainly given them as much space and air as you did with this documentary.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of poverty, and for me, very connected to that is homelessness. And I think it's one of the reasons that our film is connecting with audiences, because these are very current and very acute issues that we're dealing with. Nothing has, Jennifer makes this point in the film that so little has changed. And so we often look back on the 60s and think about it being such a disruptive time, and a time of change, a time of improvement, time of, opening up these issues and really interrogating them. And it's true that did happen in the 60s. But what happened since then? What has changed, if anything? And we're looking at a lot of homelessness, and so these issues they felt very important to me, and it connects me to the other work, as you said. This film, even though it's about a film and it's about a biography, maybe the moment of this film, it also is about so many social justice issues that we deal with in our other films as well.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of, and I was trying to struggle to remember also the name of this gentleman who was choked out on the subway train in New York City last month. Because I'm thinking, here's a guy who was obviously struggling with if not mental illness, something close to it possibly, and was just yelling about how hungry and thirsty he was, and then somebody came up and choked him to death, and I was thinking, this, you're right. We're still kind of grappling with many of the same issues. Nobody should be on a subway train hungry and thirsty, and certainly shouldn't be killed because they're disturbing somebody else's quiet. I don't know, but
it speaks so much to John Schlesinger's incredibly brilliant directing and the work he did with Adam Hollander, the cinematographer, because he comes to this as a documentary filmmaker. As you know, he had made many documentaries before he made the few narrative films that preceded Midnight Cowboy. And, he comes to New York and he's observing what's going on. He didn't just sit out and say, I'm going to make, he had read James Leo Hurley's book and was very moved by it. But he also saw how it fit into the culture. And that's big. I mean, his film diverges quite a bit from the book.
Yeah.
Because he too had to make room for his observations.
Comes across as like a superhero in this documentary. Again, it's called Desperate Souls, Dark Cities, and the Legend of Midnight Cowboy, and which will be having its theatrical premiere at Film Forum on June 22nd.
No, June 23rd.
June 23rd. My eyes are playing tricks.
That's right, and it's premiering both in New York and in LA on June 23rd.
Which theater in LA?
The Lemley Royal and the Encino.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and
there will be 2-week runs with each of these theatrical.
Fantastic. Oh yeah, they're going to line up they're going to love that, and they're playing Midnight Cowboy also. I know they're pairing it at Film Forum because I peeked. And you'll be there.
Oh yes.
Forum, right.
Well, I will be there the first night. I will be doing a Q&A with Brenda Vaccaro and Lucy Sant. And the second night I'll be doing, and then the second night I'll be doing a Q&A with Charles Kaiser and Jennifer Salt.
Oh my God.
And then Sunday afternoon, I'll be doing a Q&A with Glenn Frankel. And Glenn will be signing copies of his books that afternoon too. So I hope people will come to the opening weekend because we're going to have a lot of fun.
It's star-studded. This is now I'm regretting. I should rethink my whole move out of New York City just based on your appearances that you set up.
Come on back, but you're not that far away, Adam. You're just
true.
A hop, skip, and a jump from New York. So
yeah, no, you're right. In fact, I'm going down on Saturday, and but I have to look at everything now. And you're right. I may have to come down. Well, I'm one of my obsessions, and there are a few, but this one is I've done a lot of immersing myself rather in the subject of the Hollywood blacklist and the Red Scare in general. And Waldo Salt, of course, was one of the many Hollywood screenwriters that were blacklisted and couldn't work and had to write under an assumed name, I assume. But you got Jennifer, who has a small role in Midnight Cowboy.
So she plays 2 roles in our film. She was both an actor in the original film, and she speaks on behalf of her father very eloquently.
Yeah. She really does, and it's really moving to see her keep his memory. The way she keeps it and honors it, wants to honor it. I thought that was very moving, and she was incredibly eloquent, and really it was almost like the avatar for people like myself who were watching the film. So that was it's a very powerful documentary, and but a bit. Do you feel like it is a departure for you, or a step in were you making a conscious decision to make a different kind of documentary in this?
Well, I had made a film on Sidney Lumet. So,
that's true. The first time I met you. That's right.
Yeah, so I obviously am very interested in filmmaking and filmmakers, but in also in the case with Sidney Lumet, I was more interested in the moral issues that he deals with in that film than I was in his actual carving out his career. We do talk about his career and the issues that he was faced with, but at the end of the day, it's a kind of morality set. It's a set of questions that deal with the morality in a few of these films that became most important for me. This film is different in that it doesn't have a kind of story arc. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. There are a lot of elements that are just woven together in a kind of free associative manner. And so people sometimes refer to that as an essay film. That feels a little bit scholarly to me, and I'm not sure that it does necessarily fit into that kind of essay format, but I guess it does more so than the other films I've made.
Well, it is utterly watchable. And I recommend, if you haven't seen The Midnight Cowboy, by the way, I've seen it probably half a dozen times. I remember my cousin Hetty had, in her apartment in the East Village, up the poster, like an entire, like floor to ceiling size poster of Midnight Cowboy. And I remember it capturing my interest even as a young boy, like, what is that movie? Those two guys. And it's, but as I watched it, as I aged, and especially the last time, I remember getting very moved by Jon Voight's performance. And it's sort of like what first you kind of, I think Dustin Hoffman steals a lot of the screen because of the Ratso Rizzo is such an amazing invention, such an incredible character, and he embodies him. So, when we get to Miami, you got to call me Rico. I mean, it's an amazing performance.
Very good. Very good.
I didn't go with the usual line.
Yeah, good for you. No, I think that one of the things that we're asking in our film, and one of the reasons I made it, was to figure out why it did resonate so much when it came out and why it continues to do that.
Yes.
You're doing this discussion with me today because that film resonates. Because not only my film resonates, but Midnight Cowboy resonates. And so you see some real value in this, having this conversation. So the question is why? And I hope that I don't know if we answer it completely in the movie, but I hope we've addressed it sufficiently so that you do feel there's a kind of inevitability about Midnight Cowboy having been made when it was made.
Well, Nancy, you resonate as a filmmaker, so thank you for coming on. I think I don't know what number, I should have checked beforehand, but you might be you might be a gold circle member at this point, meaning 5 visits, maybe, I don't know, 5 appearances on the show. Again, the film documentary opens at Film Forum in New York City on June 23rd, and at the Laemmle, I remember you said Encino, and what's the other one?
And the Laemmle Royal.
And the Laemmle Royal, is that okay? Just Google that and then buy your tickets. And
right, and if people want to know where it's opening in other parts of the country, I don't know where your listeners are from, but the Zeitgeist website lists all the screenings all over the country. So people can find out where else it's listed, where it's playing. And we will, we do social media and all of that. So there is a page on on our film, Desperate Souls, Dark City and the Legend of Midnight Cowboy. They can follow us as well, but if they go to the Zeitgeist website, they're going to find out where it's playing.
And I will put the links at the end of this, and I'll be sharing links too, so we'll get the word out. Really all right. Well, I think that's a great place to sort of end it because you just had the final word. I like that. Thank you really for making the time, and look forward to the next. If you feel compelled to drop a news breaking announcement about your next project, feel free. I won't stop you.
Okay. Well, we know what that is. You'll definitely know about it.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
All right.
I look forward to it. Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.